You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is June 2nd, 2024, and this is episode 280 of Lighthearted. I have a very special guest host today, Milca Touceda, who works at the U.S. Lighthouse Society headquarters in Washington. Hi, Milca.
Hi, Jeremy. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Muy bien.
Muy
And I'm
bien.
sure I didn't do the greatest job of pronouncing your name. Just say your name for us, please.
My name is Milca Touceda.
Milca Touceda. Maybe approximating it, doing my best. But it's really great to have you on today. And I want to chat with you a bit. But first, in a few minutes, we're going to listen to a conversation about the destination known as Historic Ships in Baltimore, which actually includes a lighthouse and a lightship, along with a few other ships. So welcome to the Lighthearted family, Milca. I know you've been working for the U.S. Lighthouse Society for a while now, but are you actually new to the state of Washington?
I moved here 4 years ago, almost five, by the end of 2019. So I got here in a hard time because it was right before COVID.
Oh, right, right.
So everything was different. Now everything looks so much better.
What do you do for the U.S. Lighthouse Society?
I do a little bit of everything. I work with memberships. I help the members with their questions, reply the emails, and I work a little bit on the. I'm starting to work in the social media, so starting to get ideas. Last thing I did was the survey. Why do you love lighthouses? And that was amazing. We got a lot of responses. People really excited to share why they love lighthouses, and that is really really nice to connect with the members. That is something that I loved. I did an interview a month and a half, for the podcast in Spanish to the director of the Argentinian museum, the southernmost museum, and there's a lighthouse, the southernmost lighthouse over there. So he told me everything about the story and the connection with Jules Verne, who wrote a book.
That's right, the lighthouse at the end of the world. Yeah.
Yes.
I kind of sat in on that interview when you did it, but of course, not, knowing next to no Spanish, I didn't get a whole lot of it. So I know you're working on editing that along with English subtitles. So I look forward to that.
Right. I have the subtitles done and corrected already. So I'm going to send that to you if you want to check that everything is okay, just to make sure that everything is understandable in the subtitles.
No, I look forward to it, and so again, it'll be something that us English speakers we can read the subtitles and follow along, but also our Spanish speakers. I don't know if there's any Spanish speakers who listen to this, this version of the podcast, but I hope we can maybe reach some new people.
I think we do. Not long ago, I had a phone call, and the person asked me where I was from. And he said, "Oh, so you speak Spanish? I'm from Mexico. I speak Spanish too." So that was my first phone call in Spanish.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about the survey you did. Why do you love lighthouses, right? What can you tell me, maybe one or two of the responses that you really liked?
Well, there were people sending poems about lighthouses and pictures, really good pictures. Some people mentioned that they brought their families closer. Like, for example, there's a story about a dad and his daughter, and they go visit all the lighthouses together. And I think they have an Instagram account where they post all the lighthouses that they go to, and they've been collecting the stamps, so they have the passports. That's one story that I read. A lot of poems. An 11-year-old kid, his name is Grady, he sent a drawing and a poem too. So we got a lot of responses. That's why I got so excited. Like, people want to share their love for lighthouses with us, and that's really nice. It's good to know why, because everything has like a different reason.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that we all love about lighthouses, but everybody has their own personal reasons as well. So, that was a great idea, that survey.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved it.
We haven't actually set up, but you're from Argentina originally, right?
Hmm.
You lived in other parts of this country before that?
Yeah, I visited before. I went to California. I went to New York, Upper New York, like Rochester, and New York City too. Not long ago, I went to Los Angeles. I went to the beach here in Washington State, and I visited Grace Harbor Lighthouse.
Gray's Harbor. Yep, I know that one in Washington. Yep.
Yes, and I went into the tower. It was nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, really nice. Because now I want to visit all the lighthouses, all of them.
Yeah, well, you've got a good start. You're working at a lighthouse, of course, Point No Point, the headquarters of the USLHS. But let me know if you need any tips on lighthouses, especially if you ever come to New England, which I hope you can sometime. I could definitely maybe help show you around here. And also, I know you have some background as a singer. Is that right?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. Back in Argentina, I was singing opera. I studied for like 20 years, and it's something that you have to study forever because it's very complex, the technique and to sing the different operas. And it's really interesting. And to connect with the history of music too.
You sent me a clip of you singing in a choir with, tell me who it was, Andrea Bocelli, right?
Andrea Bocelli, yes.
Yeah, that's quite an honor.
That was amazing. Yeah, it was such a good experience to be able to sing with him. Such a good singer. And I was in the choir behind him, but the orchestra, everything was amazing. A great experience for me. Yeah.
Well, that's impressive. Obviously, you're a pretty accomplished singer, so I hope you get to do some of that in this country as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
So, what attracted you to the U.S. Lighthouse Society? Were lighthouses an interest before that?
History and museums were my thing. I had like music was everything, right? I was teaching, singing in choirs. But on the other hand, I love history, and I love to go to every museum that I can. If there's a museum, I'm gonna be there. And in Argentina, for a couple of years, for maybe 1 year, I was a tour guide for the Colón Theater. Is the biggest and most important opera theater in Argentina, and it's famous because it's between the five most important theaters related to acoustics. It's the best one. It's compared to La Scala de Milan, the opera from Paris. It's really, really, really important in the opera world, classical music world, right? So I used to be a tour guide there, and I learned so much about the history and the arts and everything. So yeah, that was like my other branch, right?
I always see lighthouses as kind of a window into history. You get into lighthouses, and it just leads into the broader, history of our country and everything, or any country that has lighthouses. So it's all. If you have an interest in history, then I think a lot of this is going to appeal to you. Sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I love to see the old appliances that people used to use, right, to make their life easier. I love to learn things about that, and even the architecture of the lighthouses. You can tell the different styles and the different immigration that was in that area based on the architecture of the lighthouse and the different building style, right? Because probably the ones here in Washington are different than the ones in Florida because it was different immigration, different history, a lot of different things in different states. And you can tell that by the architecture too. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that is a aspect of lighthouses that people don't talk about as much, but architecture is very interesting. So we could chat for hours, I think, and we will. But right now, we should probably get into today's episode, today's interview. So can you please help me out with that, Milka?
Sure, Jeremy. Located in the inner harbor of Baltimore, Maryland, Historic Ships of Baltimore celebrates more than 200 years of Maryland's naval and maritime history. The site's attractions include the sloop-of-war Constellation, the last sail-only warship designed and built by the United States Navy.
Among the other highlights are the USS Torsk, a Navy submarine commissioned in 1944, and the 1936 U.S. Coast Guard cutter 37, also known as the Taney. For lighthouse and lightship buffs, there are two big historic attractions. The lightship LV-116, also known as the Lightship Chesapeake, is a National Historic Landmark and one of a small number of preserved lightships in the U.S.
Built in 1930, the lightship spent its longest assignment off Cape Henry, Virginia, guiding maritime traffic in and out of the Chesapeake Bay for 2 decades. The lightship was decommissioned in 1971, and ownership eventually was transferred to the City of Baltimore.
Also on the city's waterfront is the 7 Foot Knoll Lighthouse, which began service in 1856 at the entrance to the Patapsco River on the approach to Baltimore Harbor. The light station was an isolated and difficult assignment for keepers, especially in winter.
After automation and destaffing in 1948, the lighthouse fell into poor condition. The City of Baltimore had the structure moved to its new home on the city's waterfront in 1988. It was then restored and opened to the public.
I was in Baltimore for a couple of days on my recent trip down the coast. I had the opportunity to speak with Alexa Price, Public Programs Manager for Historic Ships in Baltimore. We actually did the interview inside the 7 Foot Knoll Lighthouse. So let's listen to my conversation with Alexa Price now. I'm here today inside the 7 Foot Knoll Lighthouse on the waterfront in the city of Baltimore, part of Historic Ships in Baltimore. I think I have that right. Historic Ships in Baltimore.
Yes, that is the name of the museum.
I always want to say Historic Ships of Baltimore.
It's okay. It's a common way to say it, but we're in Baltimore.
In Baltimore. And with me is Alexa Price, the Public Programs Manager, and she just gave me a tour of the lighthouse, and it's great to be here. Thanks so much for doing this today, Alexa.
Oh, great. Glad to chat with you today.
Well, before we get into the questions, you just mentioned you happen to be from the neighboring town to me, even though you work in Baltimore now. You're from Stratham, New Hampshire.
I am.
Yeah.
So I grew up near Portsmouth and spent a lot of time on the water. So probably why I'm in this line of work now.
Yeah, and you came down here for the heat and humidity, right?
Of course, I love it. No, I don't. I want snow. Not right now, but...
Yeah. Well, otherwise, it seems like a good place to be. So before we get to the lightship we're going to talk about today and the lighthouse and a bit about the other attractions here. In fact, why don't we start with the Constellation? You know, I actually just attended a conference at the USS Constitution Museum, right next to the famous USS Constitution in Boston. And I think a lot of people have the idea that the Constellation is a frigate like the Constitution, and they're sister ships, but that's not correct. Am I correct when I say that's not correct?
You are correct. It is not correct. So there was a frigate, Constellation. So when people think that that's a ship that we have, they're right in connecting the name with a frigate. So Constitution was built in Boston. It's one of the original 6 frigates of the U.S. Navy. Constellation was another of the original 6 frigates, and she was built in Fells Point here in Baltimore. So that's why the ship became such kind of a landmark for us here in Baltimore. And for the longest time, people did think she was the frigate. There was a whole to-do in the 19th century where she had gone through a lot of different uses. She was a training ship for a while, did some missions overseas, training midshipmen. And somewhere around like the 1880s, newspapers start referring to her as the frigate. I don't know why. I would have thought it'd be sometime around the bicentennial, but it took a little later before people just started thinking that she was that original frigate. So by the time she came to Baltimore in 1955, she had been heavily refitted to look like the frigate. And I've been talking about the frigate this whole time. The one that we have is a sloop-of-war. She's from 1854. Right. So what happened was in 1853, the original frigate had gone through a good life of service since 1797, and she was brought into Norfolk for repairs, and the Navy was supposed to refit the ship. They had funds to refit the ship, but due to financial constraints and the fact that the ship was just so far used up, essentially, it could be fixed, but at a really high cost, so they just built a new one and transferred the name Constellation to ours. It's a sloop-of-war, meaning it has one gun deck. It has fewer cannons than Constitution.
Almost looks like a little brother or sister of the Constitution.
Yeah, she's actually slightly longer.
It is slightly longer.
But only by a few feet. So she's about the same size. The real difference is that she only has the one gun deck. So a frigate has more guns or cannons.
Right.
So again, by the time Constellation came here, she'd been refit to kind of look like a frigate, and Baltimore believed her to be the frigate for a very long time. It was only in the 90s when she went through some more repairs that more investigation was done. There were pieces found that had been inscribed with the name of the Norfolk Navy Yard. So it was pretty clear that this was a completely new ship. It wasn't the original frigate. Newspapers say that there are pieces of the original frigate in our Constellation, but we're never sure which ones they were and if they're still there. So It's a different ship, but if you hear Constellation being referred to as a frigate, there was a frigate Constellation. That's just not what we have. We have a 1854 ship.
Okay, I got it. I think I got it. That's a lot of dates. I'm impressed.
It is. Well, we get the question a lot because, again, Baltimore has had this ship for years and years. So even if people who haven't been down here, they've heard of the ship.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. So another one of the historic vessels here is the submarine, U.S. Navy submarine Torsk. And can you say a little bit about what the historic significance of that is?
Yeah, so Torsk is a diesel-electric submarine. It was also actually built in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So another plug for Portsmouth.
At the shipyard. Yeah.
Yep, she was built up there, and so she was launched near the end of World War II and was on Pacific duty. So she was off the coast of Japan for her brief time in World War II, and she, by happenstance, has the distinction of firing the last 2 torpedoes of the war. She fired on 2 coastal defense frigates off the coast of Japan. That was her brief service in World War II. Afterwards, she's a diesel-electric sub, right at the era when nuclear subs were going to come into the forefront pretty soon in the 50s. So she had a conversion later in her life to try to make her more up-to-date, where nuclear subs could stay underwater longer. The diesel-electric subs were not very good at that, so she had a conversion to add a snorkel, which would allow her to operate at periscope depth. So they tried to make this sub more up to speed with modern ones in the 50s, but with nuclear subs at the forefront, she became obsolete very quickly and was used as a dive training ship. So in addition to her World War II service, she has the distinction of having over 10,000 dives on her record, just from training sailors on how to dive a submarine.
Wow, that's a lot. I didn't know or didn't remember that it was actually built at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard.
Yes.
I believe they built more submarines there than anywhere else in World War II. It's like 70-something. That's good to know.
Yeah, there's pictures of her up there, or the crew having a swing dance in December to launch her. I tried to figure out where it was they had the reception. I thought it was the Hampton Casino Ballroom, but they called it the Casino del Jamon. And I was like, is that a ham joke or is that, I don't know.
I have no idea where that might have been.
Yeah, I couldn't find it.
So also here, another historic vessel here is the 1930 Coast Guard cutter. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, so we have Coast Guard cutter WHEC 37. Her designation is a long set of numbers and letters there. So she's a high endurance cutter, which is that designation, 37 being her number. And she was built in the 1930s. Again, like Torsk, saw Pacific service during World War II. So she was actually stationed at Honolulu Harbor during the attack on Pearl Harbor. So she was only a few miles away. And she was able to provide anti-aircraft support during that battle. And she's the last warship afloat that saw service at Pearl Harbor. I mean, I say she's a warship because she was used for war service in World War II. She went through a lot of different uses, of course, coastal patrols, as most Coast Guard cutters do, drug interdiction, weather monitoring. But during World War II, she was outfitted very similar to a battleship. So if you see pictures, she's painted battleship gray, has all sorts of guns on board. Yeah, so she is the last warship to be used during Pearl Harbor that's still afloat.
Yeah. I believe the Navy kind of took over jurisdiction over the Coast Guard during World War II. So. Yep.
Yeah, and interestingly, I know you're going to talk about the Lightship Chesapeake later. She was also requisitioned during World War II to do coastal patrols up near Boston. They were also painted battleship gray, so interesting to see a lightship painted as a warship.
Definitely. Well, that's a good segue into the lightship LV-116, known as the Lightship Chesapeake, or Chesapeake Lightship. Certainly people, our lighthouse nuts who listen to this podcast will probably be mostly interested in the lightship and the 7 Foot Knoll Lighthouse here. The lightship, the Chesapeake, was built in 1930, and it was pretty state-of-the-art at the time. Is that right?
Yes. So what made her state-of-the-art was her engine room. She's got 4 engines, and like the sub is diesel-electric. Previous lightships had been generally steam-powered. So she had a stronger engine room than previous ones. And she also had 2 generators in that engine room. And you'll go down there later and see just the impressive machinery that's down there. Yeah, so she was similar to other lightships in general structure, but really the power of her engine room was what made her state-of-the-art.
Mm-hmm. So I actually interviewed Greg, who spends a lot of time here, and is kind of the lightship guy around here, right? He's been on the podcast. But let's talk a bit about some of the highlights of the LV-116's career as a lightship. Mm-hmm.
Highlights of her career? Well, she was on various stations, so of course lightships will change their hull designation, the name on the hull, based on where they were stationed. So she was on Fenwick Station up Delaware to begin with in the early 1930s, before transferring to the Chesapeake Station. Mm-hmm. And she was fitted with 2 5,000-pound mushroom anchors, so she was able to stay in place through the most weather conditions. So there were two severe storms where she actually broke her anchor chain, and they had to drop the second anchor and try to stay on station. Mm-hmm. There's also a picture we have on site of the anchor chain having been wrapped around itself and tied in a knot. Mm-hmm. So just to imagine the sort of weather they had to ride out on that ship is just incredible. Yeah. And you hear accounts from the crew that either they loved being on there or they hated it. It was very isolated, and I mean, again, you endure all sorts of weather. So either you love being away from everybody else and just being a loner, or you hate it and you really can't wait for shore leave. So during World War II, I did mention she was requisitioned to go up to Boston. She was going to go through refits anyway, but since it was during wartime, she was painted battleship gray and just kind of did coastal patrols around Boston. Like, I mean, never really had any eventful interactions during that part of her career, but it's just an interesting little anecdote that most of our ships, or all of our ships here, actually saw service in World War II, even the lightship. Mm-hmm. So she stayed a lightship through the 70s when she became part of the National Park Service, and did educational programming for quite some time at the Potomac in D.C. And she came to Baltimore in the 80s, continued to do educational programming here. So she's had quite the career on a lot of different light stations, but also as an educational vessel for a long part of her life. That's what she's done. Yeah. So we're lucky to have her here and kind of continue that legacy.
Definitely. I'm sure you know there aren't all that many lightships left in existence in this country. Out of the dozens there were, there's only about a dozen left. So a lot of times they work best in kind of incorporated into a maritime museum or a group of ships like this.
I've seen some in pretty rough shape, so it's really good that we are still able to have this one.
Absolutely. And I know it's undergone a lot of restoration over the years. Is that kind of ongoing all the time?
Yes, we are hoping to get a dry dock soon as well. It's constant. All of our ships are under constant renovation and preservation work. Just painting and having the lights updated. Greg has been working on the lights recently, so we're really happy with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just constant maintenance to keep everything up to date.
Sure. It's like lighthouses. It's never finished.
Oh, yeah.
So let me ask you, do you have volunteer docents here who kind of help to greet the public and things like that?
We actually have a paid staff of interpreters who work on all of our ships.
Oh, okay.
They rotate between the different ships. So one day you'll be on Constellation, another day you'll be on Cutter, then you'll be on the Lightship. Mm-hmm. Some people will gear towards one ship more than others. If you find someone's really interested in one ship, they'll be on there more often. But for the most part, our staff are the paid interpreters who will move between all the ships and know a little bit about all of them. We have volunteer repair teams that come through and, of course, do interpretation as well. Greg being one of them is always happy to take people into parts of the ship that are normally closed and show people around.
So why don't we get into the lighthouse where we are right now? It's an amazing lighthouse. It's kind of one of the early screw pile lighthouses in Chesapeake Bay, and it's so different from the others. That's kind of, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with the kind of standard cottage-style screw pile lighthouses. There were a bunch of those. There are actually dozens of those. But this one, it doesn't look anything like those. So why is it so different?
Yeah, so this is a very distinctly Chesapeake lighthouse. She has a screw pile lighthouse in that she's got 9 screw piles that would have attached her to the bed of the river there at the entrance to the river here. But she's made entirely out of iron. So if you look at the lighthouse, it's very squat and round, and you'll see that the outside is riveted together like the hull of an iron ship. And Baltimore being a center of ironworks in the 19th century, when she was built in 1855, that was determined to be the best way to build this lighthouse. So you look at it, it's painted bright red, but it is built out of iron, and it's very heavy.
It's also, that makes it actually one of the oldest cast iron lighthouses in the country as well. I believe the oldest surviving cast iron lighthouse is in Burlington, Vermont, Juniper Island Lighthouse. Nothing like this.
Oh, yeah.
It's a early tower. There are several of them built with kind of, I don't know what you call them, not buttresses exactly, but support pieces towards the bottom. It's anyway, that's the oldest one, but this might be the second oldest cast iron lighthouse in the country. Is that something that you've heard before? Or
Definitely the age of it is generally remarked upon, but I don't know the actual timeline.
Yeah. Well, don't quote me on it being the second oldest, but it's definitely right up there as one of the oldest. 1856, right? Is when this began
when her
service.
beacon was first lit.
Yeah. It was isolated in its original position.
Definitely.
Was it considered kind of a rough assignment, do you think, for keepers?
Yes. The lighthouse was 6 miles from land, which is, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're right out in the Chesapeake Bay, the entrance to the Patapsco River, in the 19th century, when it was generally a little colder than it is now, in winter, it was really hard to heat a place like this. The floor plan is very wide and open compared to lighthouses that are built more upwards. This is a kind of round, wide lighthouse. So it was cold and uncomfortable, but also the ice could pile up around the screw piles and cause damage to the lighthouse. So it was very unpleasant in rough weather, whether in storms or in wintry conditions where the ice is pushing against the lighthouse. There are several accounts of the screw piles being damaged by that. I just think of those,
destroyed in some cases.
I just think of those pictures of like the Great Lakes in winter where you see the ice sheets piling up on top of each other and like the jagged edges pushing against anything. So you can imagine how that's not going to fare well, even if you are a nice iron sturdy lighthouse. So they did eventually have to put wood pilings around the lighthouse to try to break up any ice that was coming towards the screw piles.
There would have been a single keeper here as opposed to having a keeper and assistant keepers. Is that right? Or were there were assistant
two
keepers?
Assistant keepers.
There were two. There were always two.
Or hopefully.
Right.
You said it was an assignment that people didn't particularly want to have, and that was a notable problem, was keeping the assistants actually here.
Yeah. There was a fog bell, was there?
Yes.
Yep.
So out on the kind of balcony around the lighthouse, there was a fog bell. And there was a machine that you could wind every 45 minutes to keep that bell going.
Yeah, so if it was foggy at night, just in general, probably somebody had to be keeping watch overnight, watching the light and watching for fog. And
you were up in the watch room earlier, so it's sounds like a tedious job, but very important to, mostly you're just watching, but if anything happens, you got to make sure the light's going. If it's foggy, the fog bell machine needs to be wound. Every 45 minutes is what that machine particularly needed. So just constant repetition.
I've heard a lot of stories about keepers who had hobbies like painting or even something like macrame or things, or playing a musical instrument in the watchroom to keep them awake.
Oh, yeah. Much like sailors on board a ship. It's a lot of hurry up and wait, but you also want to keep busy. So I don't know about hobbies in the watchroom here, but I do know in the 1870s when lighthouse keeper James Bowling was here, and his wife Margaret was a second assistant keeper, actually. They had their family here, and they had a piano in the lighthouse, so I doubt that was all the way up in the watchroom. But they did have one in here, so not only the lighthouse keeper, but the family could engage in hobbies and just daily life here, which is one of the reasons why the assistants really did not want to be here. The Bowlings were not the only family keepers who had their family here. Previous to them, Mr. Lucas was the keeper here, and he had his family, wife and 2 children. And we have a letter from the assistant keeper saying, "I've got to resign. There's kids here, and the 2 assistants have to like crowd into one corner to sleep because." His exact words were that husband and wife were playing king and queen to the lighthouse. So, it was an interesting station for people to be on. And, I mean, you could see some of the keepers tried to make it more bearable by having their families here. Yeah. But, to the detriment of the assistant keepers.
That's pretty unusual for this type of a lighthouse to have, multiple keepers and the head keeper having his family here. I could see it would be uncomfortable.
Yeah, with the Lucas family, I don't think that was officially sanctioned. He was trying to see what he could get away with, I think.
I doubt that it was sanctioned.
Yeah, but with the Bowlings, again, Margaret was the second keeper. So it wasn't unheard of for a woman to be a lighthouse keeper or an assistant keeper. And I know in their case, his salary was $540 a year and Margaret's was $400. So, I mean, she was getting paid fairly well by the lighthouse service to do the job of a second keeper.
Yeah, that's right. $400 a year as opposed to
not
a
month.
week.
I wish it was a month. Yeah, it was a year.
Yeah, which was decent money at that time, but not great pay by any means. Yeah. So was she the only woman keeper or assistant keeper here over the years?
Here that I know of, yeah. Greg would know more about all of the women keepers here throughout the Chesapeake. Again, not unheard of.
Well, Fanny Salter being one of the most famous.
Yes.
Yeah, but there were a lot of women keepers around the country. But interesting, there was one here. So there's a famous incident. When you read about this lighthouse, you pretty much always read about this thing that happened in August 1933, which did involve the keeper here. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, so that was keeper Thomas Steinheise. He had his son here as well, and in August 1933, there was a hurricane here in the Chesapeake. I don't think it had a name. They just called it the August storm. And he noticed that there was a tug foundering nearby to the lighthouse. He could see the distress signal from that vessel. And he decided, he's going to go out there and save those poor sods from the mess they're in. Or there was a quote to that extent, the mess they're in. And his son is like, "Dad, what are you doing? This is crazy. How are you going to go out there in this storm?" But they had a motorboat that they were able to lower from the lighthouse. And Thomas Steinheise went out there and was able to rescue 5 men from the tugboat. There were, I believe, 17 people on board. One of the men that Steinheise picked up was dead upon finding him. He was an older man on the crew of the tugboat, but he was able to get 5 people alive, and one person unfortunately passed away in that boat, brought them back to the lighthouse. Other Coast Guard vessels eventually showed up and were able to rescue the rest of the crew of the tugboat, the Point Breeze, and they were surviving by pretty much standing on top of the pilot house because she'd sunk in a pretty shallow area, luckily for people who were able to kind of stand on top and ride out the storm there. But then Thomas Steinheise was later awarded a life-saving medal of honor for his duty during that storm, which he went above the call of duty to go out in that sort of weather. And that was a really telling moment in the history of this lighthouse because there had been debates about whether it was even necessary to have a lighthouse at 7 Foot Knoll anymore. But not only as a marker, but this really showed that her value as a life-saving station made her still relevant for a little while longer at least.
And to have somebody kind of keeping watch on what was happening in case something bad happened like that. Kind of reminds me in Canada, all the lighthouses are automated in Canada, but they still have over 50 lighthouse keepers, and it's mainly to keep an eye on the harbors and things like that. So
I mean, you think of the lighthouses becoming part of the Coast Guard, along with lightships in the 1930s. I mean, they're the Coast Guard. They're guarding the coast. They're keeping an eye on what people need in the area. So it's part of their history that you don't think we just see the light as a beacon, but it's also a place where people are keeping watch.
Right. So I understand you've had contact with descendants of Keeper Steinheise. Is that right?
Yes. We've had a couple people come by and check, see the lighthouse, and see that we're still keeping everything in good condition. We had one descendant come recently and was looking at our pictures of what the lighthouse looked like when she came to Baltimore in the 1980s. It's like, oh, I remember when the lighthouse looked like that, when she was being fixed up and getting ready for people to be able to see it here. So it's good to still have those connections. We've had descendants of masters of the Lightship as well come and visit. We had descendants of the first Captain Alexander Anderson come last year, the year before. So it's good that we can still have people come and tell their stories and make that connection. So we're still reaching out to the larger community and people remember.
Sure. Yeah, it helps bring it to life for sure. Yeah. So earlier when you were showing me around, there's some pictures of the amazing move of this lighthouse from out in the water to the waterfront here in Baltimore. That must have been, I can't believe, the amount of work that must have taken. Can you describe that a little bit?
So they were able to, and this was before I was here, but a crew was able to go out there and remove the lighthouse from the riverbed, so to remove part of those screw piles and be able to lift the lighthouse with a crane onto a barge. And it's incredible to see the pictures because you see the lighthouse downtown here and it looks huge. It's a sizable lighthouse, but then you see these pictures of a crane just lifting it up like it's nothing, which I'm sure it wasn't nothing.
Yeah.
But it looks just so tiny compared to the barge they were able to put the lighthouse on. So they had a rough time of it, for sure. The weather was not on their side while doing the removal and then the transfer down here to Baltimore. But she didn't really weather any damage, luckily, on the transit from her original station to Baltimore here. They did have a bit of a time trying to get under the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which people have heard a lot about recently.
Sure.
But it was always difficult with larger vessels to get underneath that bridge. I remember we've moved Constellation to dry dock under there, and Constellation just barely cleared it. So you can imagine the size of this crane that was carrying the lighthouse. So they had to lower the crane, I think by 30 feet to actually squeeze under there. So it was definitely an undertaking. But it's just a sight to see the pictures that we still have from that.
Yeah. The closest thing there's been other lighthouses moved to shore, obviously, including in the Chesapeake region here. But it also makes me think of back in my hometown of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they moved a submarine onto dry ground.
The Albacore.
The Albacore, yeah. You've probably
the
toured it.
submarine in a ditch, yep.
Yeah. The story of moving that across railroad tracks and everything else is pretty incredible. So let's talk about the present day here. First of all, I believe the vessels here are open all year, but the lighthouse is not. Is that correct?
Yes. Sometimes we have winter hours, so we're not open every single day of the week in January, February, but for the most part we are open all year round, and that's the 4 ships, Cutter, Constellation, Tourist, and the Lightship. The lighthouse, just due to visitation, is currently only open during the summer. We're opening up on Memorial Day and generally go through Labor Day. But when she is open, she'll hopefully be open every day of the week, just like the other ships. Yeah, but it's just been a matter of staffing so far. But she is quite popular in the summer. This is a popular place for people to come. So we want to make sure that the lighthouse is open.
Yeah, can't disappoint the lighthouse nuts out there.
It's true.
I can say
we have people coming with their passports, and they really want to see both the lightship and the lighthouse. So we've got the stamps. Anyone wants stamps?
I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah, you better have the stamps because, people are fanatics about that.
Oh, yes.
And, of course, this is a U.S. Lighthouse Society podcast, and that is a U.S. Lighthouse Society thing, the passports. It's one of the things the Society's known best for, certainly. Let me ask you something that just occurred to me. It used to be referred to as the Baltimore Maritime Museum, is that correct? And it was changed to Historic Ships in Baltimore.
Yes, that was because there was a merger between the Constellation Museum and the Baltimore Maritime Museum sometime in the 2000s. Again, it was before I was here. So that's why the name has changed. You'll still hear people saying the Baltimore Maritime Museum, which is a description of what we are. So that works just as well.
Well, in the sense that the collection of ships is really a maritime museum, it is. But I was wondering if people come and where's the museum, that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah, the ships are the museum. We do tell people that quite frequently. The ships are their own museums, but they're part of a larger collection. I mean, just like any museum that accessions objects, the ships are some of our objects with more objects on board. Sure. And we do have a museum building by the USS Constellation. But the museum is more than a gallery full of objects. The museum is our fleet that's spread out through the harbor.
Yeah, it's a living museum in a sense. So do you sometimes have visiting tall ships and other vessels like that?
Yes, we actually have one right now. And I'm probably going to butcher the name. It's the Brazilian ship Cisne Branco.
I think
don't
that's...
speak Portuguese, unfortunately.
No,
so
that's close enough. I saw it, yeah.
Yeah, so she is docked on the west wall right next to Constellation right now, which I just saw for the first time coming downtown to work today. It's quite the sight to see. Usually, you're walking downtown and you see the masts of Constellation, but now you see the masts are taller. There's another one. Yeah, so she's outdoing us a little bit with how tall her masts are and how many yards she's got up. But it's really great to be able to have visiting ships here. We've had a Peruvian ship so far this year. In the past, we've had a Danish ship that came for Fleet Week last year. We were going to have several more ships this year in the spring, but unfortunately with the bridge disaster, we weren't able to get more in. But we also have Fleet Week coming up, so there's going to be some Navy ships in town. There's going to be a visiting Coast Guard cutter. And so there's going to be a lot more activity in the harbor than just our museum. Yeah.
Well, speaking of the tall mass of the visiting ship, I'm staying at the Comfort Inn just a couple of blocks away, and that's absolutely the first thing I saw walking towards the waterfront here. I can see those for a long distance.
Yeah, and she has her bunting all up, the very colorful flags flying. So she's decked out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it looks great. So can people get guided tours here, people or individuals or groups?
Yes, so we do offer different tours depending on what groups are looking for. If you come just spur of the moment for daily visitation, it's more likely you're just going to do a self-guided tour. You might be able to jump on a guided tour, but it just depends on what else is going on that day. But we do book guided tours in advance. You can do that on our website. Generally, it's groups of 10 or more. We'll do guided tours on any of our ships, most in our Constellation and the Coast Guard cutter. But we do have people request lighthouse tours. We have people request Torsk tours, which are interesting to try to lead a tour through the narrow passages of a submarine. But yes, you can book those online, and we have people who are experts in all of our different ships. So you can get that experience for whatever you're looking for. We're happy to work that out for you.
Sure. I'm not sure if any U.S. Lighthouse Society tours have been here, probably, but I think it's been a few years.
We had a group last summer. They were with just a national tour group. I forget which one, a bus tour, but they specifically were looking at lighthouses. I don't think it was specifically through the Lighthouse Society.
Yeah.
But we did have a group come, and they really just wanted to see the lighthouse, so
I think
did that for them.
I think we're overdue for a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour in Chesapeake here, and this would definitely be one of the stops. I hope I could be part of that. So you are the public programs manager. Is one of the things you deal with special events here?
Somewhat. I deal with a few of those. I'm working on Fleet Week right now. I'm doing the education component of that, putting together a big event on Pier 1. There's different events that happen through the year. Like there's going to be a 4th of July deck party, hopefully, and Brian, who's our operations director, is generally working on that one. The really big events are higher up. But if people want to do ceremonies on board, I handle booking those. If people have other special events they want to do, to some degree I'm involved with that.
Ceremonies as in weddings?
We have had weddings. Generally it's military ceremonies like promotions, retirements, re-enlistments, things like that.
Now you mentioned before you have like volunteer work crews who do various things on the vessels. Are you always looking for more volunteers?
Yes, we're always interested if someone wants to come help out. Definitely interested to hear what they're interested in and see what will work for them and what they would like to do. We're not going to turn anyone down initially. If you're interested in lighthouses or ships or whatever, I mean, there's always work to be done. So it depends on what our maintenance crew has in mind and what people can do without the coverage of our insurance. But yeah,
Okay.
certainly.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is something you're involved with, but I was just looking at the website again, and I saw overnight adventures.
Yes. That's generally school groups and scout groups will do that. They'll come in the evening, do some programs on board 3 of our ships. We do them on board the submarine, the Coast Guard cutter, and Constellation. We don't do Lightship overnights right now just because it's so small, and you can't fit many participants on there. But the kids come with their chaperones. They do activities on board. They get to sleep on board the ship. They have their meals on board and get to really experience what it's like to be on board on those ships and live there, and especially just go about the duties of a sailor on board.
Yeah.
So we do offer those. It's generally kids, but we've had adults do it.
Really?
There are some Navy chief groups specifically. Chief selectees will come, and they love to do the Constellation overnights because some of them have not necessarily even been on a ship yet, so they are getting naval history as well as experience of working on a ship. Before they become chief petty officers. So we've done that, and it's a great experience for everyone involved. So it's not age restricted.
Yeah. The thing about programs like that I really like is it's a way, especially for kids, it's a way of having fun, and I don't want to say tricking them into learning history, but they're going to learn some history while they're having fun.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said for learning while doing like a hands-on activity. You'd sit there and talk to them, but who loves being lectured to?
Right.
It's great to be teaching kids while they're hauling on the braces or working the capstan or things like that.
At the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, they have the Hooper Strait Lighthouse that was brought to the museum there from the bay, and they have the same. They call it overnight adventures as well. The kids sleep in the lighthouse. So I don't know if that's been considered here. But.
We did talk about it at one point. It's just a matter of figuring out how many people we could reasonably fit in here. The benefit of Constellation and Torsk and the Coast Guard cutter is that they have pre-existing bunk space. Constellation has hammocks, and the other ones have bunks. At the moment, like I said, this lighthouse had 2 bedrooms, both of which are... they no longer contain beds. So it would be kind of a camp out on the floor, but...
That's what they do. Yeah, they use sleeping bags there. Yeah. So I have one final question for you, and this one's for bonus points.
Oh,
okay. So I hope you're ready. Hope you have your number 2 pencil sharpened. Okay. The question is, what is your favorite thing things about your association with historic ships in Baltimore?
Well, like I said, I grew up in New Hampshire, and I grew up on the seacoast, so I've never really known what it's like to be away from water, and so to be able to work on the waterfront is great for me. I would hate to just be working in an office, somewhere in the middle of the city. It's great for a lot of people, but it's not the kind of job that I wanted. I like that I get to, again, be on the waterfront, work with ships, which has always been my passion. And also just do a lot of different stuff during the day. Like I may be on a submarine one day, or I may be here in the lighthouse. I may be working with the collections, or I may be talking to people. I may spontaneously be giving a tour to 5-year-olds. Like you just never know what's going to happen. So I think it keeps things interesting. I'm not the kind of person who can generally sit still for long, so it keeps me busy.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's really a pleasure talking with you today, and once I found the lighthouse, I had a little trouble finding it.
We do hide it behind the McCormick and Schmick's, unfortunately.
Yeah. If people buy tickets here, I didn't do that, so they must give a map of the...
We have a booklet we give out to people who buy tickets, and everything is labeled on there. It's also a little harder to see right now that it's spring and the trees are leafed out. There's a tree that really, from the right angle, which is the only angle you can see, this lighthouse behind the hotel and the restaurant there.
Right.
The tree is just blocking it.
Yeah, I was walking around, and I'm saying, I know there's a lighthouse around here somewhere. My GPS was taking me kind of in circles.
It's a lovely surprise for people just walking on the pier, though, suddenly...
From the other direction.
Lighthouse,
yeah. Well, anyway, I'm glad I made it. I'm glad I got to speak with you today. It sounds like you and this place are a good fit.
I've been here for a few years, and hasn't driven me away yet. So
good. Well, again, thank you so much for hosting me and showing me around as well, and thanks for spending some time.
Like I said, it's great when I just get to talk to people about their personal passions and interests. So great time having you here.
To learn more about historic ships in Baltimore, visit historicships.org.
I really enjoyed my visit to the historic ships and the lighthouse in Baltimore's waterfront and my conversation with Alexa. Her title is Programs Manager, but she's so knowledgeable. To me, she really seems like a historian for the organization. I also want to thank Greg Krausick, who is the resident expert and lead volunteer for the Lightship Chesapeake. He's been on the podcast before, and he would have been part of this episode, but he wasn't able to be there for the interview. We did meet a little later. He gave me a tour of the lightship, and we had lunch at a famous restaurant on the Baltimore waterfront called Phillips. Milca, have you ever had a chance to tour any lightships?
No, not yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I think there's one in Seattle, close to where I live.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, you have the Lightship Swift Shore, which is part of the Northwest Seaport Maritime Heritage Center in Seattle. That's one we really need to feature on the podcast one of these weeks. That is actually, the Swift Shore is actually the oldest surviving lightship in the country. You know, in the interview with Alexa, I said there are only about a dozen lightships still in existence. I think the number is actually 15, but some of them are in rough shape. 9 of them are museums, are parts of maritime museums. So do you have any plans for lighthouse visits coming up?
Not yet. I haven't been thinking about it because I'm really busy working here. Especially in the summer, we're going to be really busy. But yeah, I'm looking forward to start planning. Well, this weekend I went to Point Wilson in Port Townsend here in Washington. And that's a beautiful location. And I got to feed deer, hand feed the deer. They ate apples from my hand. So that was beautiful. And the lighthouse, I went up. I was able to go up the tower, and it was magnificent.
Yeah. Of course, Point Wilson is managed by the U.S. Lighthouse Society, and there are overnight stays in the keeper's house there, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's beautiful inside.
That is correct. And I highly recommend it.
I didn't see any deer there, but when I was there last year, I saw orcas offshore, pod of orcas swimming away from us. But that's the first time I've actually seen orcas out in the wild. So that was pretty cool.
You are very lucky. If someone is interested in visiting Point Wilson or Point No Point, they can rent the keeper's quarters. Just by the water, they will get to experience the beautiful views, the animals. There's a lot of different animals you can see. You're at the beach. What can be better than that? So you can go to uslhs.org to learn more. Look under travel, and they will be able to find more information.
And also, I want to remind everyone to also check out uslhs.org to learn about all the things the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers, including tours, the passport program, preservation grants, and more. Remember that donations and memberships help to support this podcast. Before we sign off for today, Milca, I just want to ask you one more question. What do you love about lighthouses? And I know we already said history, but anything else that comes to mind?
Well, they make such a good composition for pictures. They're like a poem in images.
A visual poem. Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So you do a lot of photography as well?
I like to take pictures. With my phone. I don't have any equipment, but yeah, I like to take pictures, and weather makes a different picture, right? So if it's sunny, you will get a feeling. If it's cloudy, like it was raining, for example, in Port Townsend last weekend, it makes another picture, and it gives you a different feeling, probably of loneliness, and you get to experience or maybe imagine how the life of the keeper was, and think about that. And so yeah, you can go through different emotions with pictures. So what do you love about lighthouses?
There's so much, you know. I mean, I started photographing them too. That's how I first got interested back in the 1980s, you know, before your time. But then as I was visiting them and photographing them, I started to also read about them, and the stories of the keepers for me just captivated me. You know, the stories of the keepers and families that lived at them. But also, they are a symbol of hope and guidance and so forth, and I think that's an important part of it too. So even if a person doesn't think about it that much, I think that's part of their appeal. They are a very strong symbol of hope. But so it's that plus the visual, like you said, plus the history of the people who lived at them. It's all interesting. So thank you so much, Milca, for taking part in today's episode. We'll have to do it again sometime. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I loved it, and I hope we do this again.
I want to wish everyone a happy summer. We are getting close to the official start of summer very soon. We will be back with a new episode next week. For now, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
Y que tu luz siga brillando. And keep a good light.
I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.